All right, good afternoon, class. We'll pick up where, actually, we're not picking up where we left off. This is a bit of a special screencast in the sense that I'm trying to front load an activity that we're going to do in class tomorrow. This week we've been looking at how the early English colonists and Europeans who came to North America with a long-term expectation, a commitment to not just coming to establish trade relationships and take things like furs and other resources back to the mother country, but folks who, as I mentioned in class, to some degree intended to sever the umbilical cord to the mother country. Now, of course, they would still maintain trade relationships both through the mercantile capitalist system and later industrial capitalist system. But nonetheless, they are starting for the most part anew. And today I want to introduce to you Karl Marx and some basic economic theory put forth by Karl Marx to help us understand how the natural environment and the natural resources of the natural environment in English North America came to take on characteristics of the capitalist system that we discuss and that plays a fairly powerful role in our economic, social, cultural, military discussions today. It remains very relevant. And so in order to help you understand that, and I will say that North America offers in some ways a really interesting case study for Marxist theories regarding the economy and capital and natural resources, because it is something of a fresh start or a hard reset. And so we're going to try to take advantage of this case study, partly because this case study is also the focal point of this course, which is focusing on that relationship between humans and their natural environment. So these are our objectives, and let's get after it. And my hope is that by virtue of absorbing some of the basic comments that I'm making today, you will be better situated to participate in our activity tomorrow that we'll do in small groups. So with that, I apologize. Some of these clicks are not in order. So first off, let's start with the term resource. It's obviously a really important term and concept when we're talking about the natural environment and its relationship to human economies. And so we can start by looking at the term itself and where it comes from. It's a Latin term, resurgere. I don't know if I have that pronounced particularly, if that's correct. But what obviously is important here is this notion of to arise again. Now, you stop right there, that might not make a whole lot of sense, to arise again. But if you think about it in the context of renewable resources, right? Renewable resources, as we talk about, as we discuss them today, are things like trees, right? Timber is a renewable resource because trees can be planted. Wind is a renewable resource. Solar is a renewable resource. There are, this resource can be used and then resupplied without much difficulty. Unlike non-renewable resources, things like coal, oil, natural gas, resources that are either, once they are used, they are gone, or they are just degraded to such a form that they can no longer meaningfully be made use of by humans, or perhaps it takes just so long, the scope of time that it would take to renew these resources is so great that they're thought of as being non-renewable. But one thing I want you to note, in terms of the use of this term resource, you'll note in the 17th century, this time during which the English colonists are sorting out and establishing their new relationship with the natural environment of the Americas, the idea of resource was land or earth giving resources for human advantage. So in my mind, I'm thinking a tree that gives itself to allow for a fence. And I shouldn't speak of this in the Mi'kmaq sense. It's not like the tree has a mind and an intent that it wants to share itself with the humans. But the idea of resources as something that humans would make use of to meet their basic needs of survival and, you know, very close to Carolyn Merchant's idea of reproduction, the daily demands and requirements that we all have to continue to thrive as members of our species. But then if you look in the 18th century, we start to see a really interesting change of meaning. A resource becomes an element of wealth or intended for profit. Two very different things. Carolyn Merchant's notion of reproduction, what it is we need to meet our needs and survive on a day in, day out basis. That, of course, is fed by resources. But the desire for wealth and profit, sort of more of our wants, if you will, things that go beyond what we absolutely need, this starts to become the more preferred use of the term resource. And of course, here we're talking primarily about natural resources, but resources take a number of different forms, right? There are natural resources, there are human resources, there are intellectual resources, okay? They take different forms, but our main purpose for today, purposes are going to be to focus on natural resources first and foremost, but then secondly, human resources, particularly labor, okay? So if we look at things happening in the global economy during the 1600s and 1700s, the English colonists come to the Americas in a somewhat mutually agreeable set of circumstances. Again, the Stuart kings of James and Charles were happy to get rid of the early Pilgrims and many of the Puritans. And of course, the Pilgrims and Puritans were happy to take leave of England and Europe and all their references to the Antichrist and so on and so forth. Their religious and economic purposes, I should say, futures, were thought to be very much awaiting them in the Americas. So the mercantilist economy of the 1600s and 1700s is one where mother countries, largely from Europe, are extending their reach and their colonial possessions such that they can take natural resources from those far-flung places. So Spain at this time is bringing in silver and gold from its possessions in Central and South America, also taking in various some other plantation and agricultural crops and commodities. Okay, and what this brings us to is the idea, the mercantilist era of the global economy is very much familiar with commodities. And commodities are essentially raw materials that are the produce, the product of the natural environment in various regions around the globe. But what starts to happen during this mercantilist period, and again, a phenomenon that the English colonists would have been fairly aware of at this time, is that where most regions of the world, their relationship to their natural environment involves something known as use value. So commodities have use value. They are things that allow us to meet our everyday needs. And use value is, of course, absolutely critical to the human condition and humans' ability to survive and thrive. But what mercantilism does is it adds another layer, and that is exchange value, meaning commodities are not just valuable and beneficial to us because they help us meet our needs in a given time period, such as today and this week, exchange value becomes a storable form of wealth, right? If you can harvest wheat, you can harvest beef, and to a lesser extent the leather and pelts that come with the cattle industry. And you can store these, you can first off, you can produce them or harvest them in sufficient surplus, and then you can take the excess, the surplus, and trade it and convert that from its probably perishable form of, say, beef, right? Beef can rot and spoil. But if you sell that beef and convert it into currency, say silver or gold bullion, like we see here in this picture in front of us, then you have now made that form of wealth storable and transferable. And so the big development of the mercantilist capitalist system throughout the world is that we're starting to see exchange value become more important. So natural resources can be consumed in the immediate and short term, and the value of today's natural resources can then be converted into a longer, storable form of wealth. And this may not seem like a very exciting development, but it has tremendous consequences for the human-natural environment relationship. So here we go. Along comes Karl Marx, and granted, he is writing, Karl Marx, even though we're applying his theories to the experience of the 1600s and English colonists in North America, it's worth noting that Karl Marx is a mid-19th century. He's writing in the mid-1800s and just trying to explain theories of how the economy and resources and human beings and capital fit together. So for Marx, there's three really important things. And again, I'm being a little simplistic here, but there's land, there's labor, and there's capital. And another way of thinking about land is natural resources, okay? And another way of thinking about labor is human resources. And then there's capital. Those who own capital are in a, according to Marx, in a rather preferential or special position within society. And briefly, so I'm not throwing around a term that maybe is not widely understood, capital I will define simply as the money it takes to make money. Okay, so capitalists, before they can start to profit, they invest money or capital so that they will have the means of production. This could be the factories that they build to convert natural resources into widgets. It could be a form of capital, would actually be like the smock or apron that a Starbucks employee wears, right? The capitalist investor in that particular Starbucks store had to outfit the employees, had to buy the coffee, espresso machines. They had to put the mugs on the shelf for sale, the cups, you name it. All of that is capital, the upfront investment that will later be used to hopefully make a profit if the capitalists' hopes turn out for them. So labor for Marx is the all-important transition here, because labor is the connection that takes natural resources and turns them into profits. So there are natural resources like standing trees, laborers, so we can think of these as loggers or sawyers or draggers or millers, all these different people who are involved in the lumber economy. They apply their labor to the raw material, in this case the standing timber in the forest, and they turn it into something that makes profit for their capitalist investor. Now, for Marx, the problem is in the industrial capitalist system, what we wind up with is labor not having as many options as they had before the industrial capital era. With this, I'm going to stop, and I'll leave some time to start tomorrow before we start our activity. Thank you.